The cold chill of marble seeped through the thin satin of her evening gown, a harsh contrast to her last memory. The warmth of Egyptian cotton sheets. In the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel. Amelia opened her eyes. Instead of gilded ceilings and sparkling crystal chandeliers, she saw gaunt, bare tree branches reaching for the gray New York night sky. A cold panic seized her chest. How can I fall asleep in a luxury suite and wake up in a cemetery? She shot up her hurried breaths, forming white clouds in the frigid air. Around her were Gothic mausoleums and stone angel tombstones, silent sentinels in the darkness. This was Woodlawn, the historic cemetery in the Bronx. She recognized it. But she didn't understand why she was here. Her handbag was still there, placed neatly on a stone slab beside her. Inside her phone and a thick envelope of cash, the client's money were untouched. Everything was the same, except for one horrifying fact: she had fallen asleep in Manhattan and woken up among the dead. An uncontrollable shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't the first time. Memories flooded back, not of last night, but of another event, a day that was supposed to be the beginning of her eternal happiness. The wedding. Weeks before the big day, Amelia had pleaded with Ethan to cut costs. "Ethan, do we really need a 12-piece orchestra, or a 7-foot-tall champagne tower?" she asked gently. Flipping through the bills piling up on the small dining table of their rented Brooklyn apartment. "We should be thinking about the future, about a down payment on a house, not the fleeting admiration of a few hundred guests." But he just brushed off her concerns with a smile so confident it bordered on arrogance. "Amelia, you don't understand." He set his tone as if he were explaining a complex business concept. "This is an investment. The people we're inviting, they're not just friends. They're connections. People will talk. We can't afford to look mediocre. This wedding has to be the biggest event this city has ever seen." And so Ethan had borrowed, taking out large loans from dubious sources, far more than he should have. He justified it by saying that on the wedding day money would flow like a river. "Darling, don't worry," he reassured her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. "Our guests will gift us generous checks. My uncle, my father's business partners, they won't let us down. We can pay off the debts and still have plenty left over to start our dream life." Amelia had sighed, shaking her head. She had tried to convince him, but Ethan was mesmerized by the idea of impressing the world, the New York high society he so desperately wanted to belong to. The wedding day arrived, and just as Ethan had predicted, the magnificent ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was packed. Ethan and Amelia's wedding became the talk of the city's society blogs. It was the kind of wedding one only sees in movies: extravagant, opulent, overflowing with wealth and sophistication. The grand rooms sparkled under enormous crystal chandeliers. Ethan, in a custom-made Tom Ford tuxedo, smiled with satisfaction. Amelia, in a Vera Wang gown, stood by his side, feeling like she was playing a role. Everyone they knew, and even strangers Ethan wanted to impress, had come to witness this royal wedding. The orchestra played Vivaldi's symphonies, exquisite dishes were served, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the space. Ethan beamed as he danced with Amelia, eagerly awaiting the moment the wedding gift envelopes would start being handed over. He had envisioned checks with 5-6 figures, but when the party ended and they returned to their honeymoon suite, faced with a mountain of luxurious envelopes, reality delivered a cruel blow. The wedding gifts trickled in. There were no checks as he had hoped. Only a few generous guests wrote checks for a few $100s. Some even gave gifts that were pre-registered online. Others simply offered their congratulations without a single dollar. The smile on Ethan's face froze, then crumbled. This wasn't supposed to happen. Where were the real estate moguls who were supposed to sign generous checks? Where were the wealthy uncles who had promised to take care of him? Where were the guests he had spent hundreds of thousands of borrowed dollars to entertain? As the night wore on, the money they received was only enough to pay a very small fraction of the enormous debts. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The situation was serious. Extremely serious. Amelia watched him silently, her heart filled with sympathy, but also frustration. She had seen this coming. She had tried to stop him, but it was too late. The harsh reality hit them. As soon as the wedding euphoria faded, the creditors started calling, then knocking on their door. At first it was polite reminders, then threats. The wedding venue manager demanded the remaining balance. The catering company wanted their money. Everyone wanted to be paid. Ethan was drowning in his own ambition. He had nothing left, not a penny in savings. His bank account was empty. Amelia tried to be strong for both of them, but their situation grew worse every day. "Ethan, we have to do something," she said one evening as they sat in their nearly empty apartment. They had sold most of their furniture to pay off a portion of the debt. "Maybe we should move to a smaller place in a cheaper neighborhood and start over." Ethan buried his face in his hands. "I don't know, Amelia. I don't know what to do." She gently placed a hand on his knee. "We'll figure it out. But first, you have to accept that we made a mistake." Ethan let out a long, heavy sigh. "I just wanted to give you a dream wedding." Amelia shook her head, sadness evident in her eyes. "You wanted to impress people, Ethan. People who have now gone back to their lives while we're suffering here." The truth of that statement stabbed at his pride like a knife. A few weeks later, Ethan swallowed his pride and started looking for work, any work. He worked long hours at manual labor jobs, trying to repair the damage he had caused. Amelia, with her resourceful nature, started taking on freelance graphic design projects, working day and night to earn extra income. Slowly, painfully, they began to climb out of the abyss. But the road ahead was long and arduous. There were nights they had almost nothing to eat, days when the weight of the debt felt almost unbearable. But through it all, Amelia stood resiliently by Ethan's side, even when he felt like a complete failure. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but nothing changed for Ethan and Amelia, except that the burden seemed to grow heavier. They had tried everything. Ethan knocked on the door of every company he had ever had a connection with, humbling himself to take temporary minimum-wage jobs, but his bruised pride made it impossible for him to stay anywhere for long. He even considered moving to another city, a place where his reputation wasn't yet tarnished by failure. Amelia, with her freelance design work, earned a little money, but it was just enough to keep them fed and pay the rent. And the creditors never stopped coming. Some were patient, others were not. One afternoon, a man they had never seen before came knocking. He wore an expensive but slightly disreputable suit, and his voice boomed like thunder in the narrow hallway. "Ethan," he said without any greeting, "I've been very patient. The people I represent are not. If I don't see my money within 2 days, you'll see a different side of me." He didn't need to say more. The cold look in his eyes said it all. Ethan slammed the door and turned to Amelia, his face taut with frustration and fear. "I can't take this anymore," he let out. Amelia sighed, a feeling of exhaustion washing over her. "We have to keep trying, Ethan. We'll find a solution." But Ethan had another idea in mind, something much darker. That night in their small apartment, in the stifling silence, broken only by the distant wail of an ambulance siren, Ethan finally voiced what had been eating at him. "Amelia," he said, his voice hesitant, There's a way to get money fast." She looked up, her eyelids heavy with fatigue, trying to read his face. "What way?" Ethan hesitated, rubbing his palms together nervously. "You know there are men out there, powerful men. They're willing to pay a lot of money for a woman like you." Amelia froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "What did you just say?" Ethan sighed, avoiding her gaze. "Look, I know it sounds awful, but just think about it for a minute. Just once or twice. Some of them won't even want much. A dinner, a conversation." "Ethan, stop." Amelia's voice broke. "Are you suggesting I sleep with other men for money?" Ethan finally looked at her, his eyes filled with desperation. "Amelia, we're sinking. We need money. Do you want to keep living like this, running from creditors, worrying about our next meal?" Tears began to well up in Amelia's eyes. "I married you because I believed in us. I believed in our love and our future. And now you want me to sell myself as if I have no value." Ethan stood up too, grabbing her shoulders. "It's not like that, Amelia. This is just a temporary solution. just enough to get us above water." She pushed his hands away, shaking her head vehemently. "I can't believe this. You're supposed to be the one to protect me, Ethan, not the one to push me into the arms of strangers." Ethan let out a loud breath, running his hands through his messy hair. "I don't want this either. But what other choice do we have?" Amelia turned her back to him, her whole body trembling with anger and betrayal. But the following days passed, and their suffering only intensified. The electricity was cut off. The landlord posted an eviction notice on their door. Food became a luxury. Ethan stopped looking for work altogether. He became bitter, withdrawn, convinced the whole world was against him. And every day his words echoed in Amelia's mind. "Just once, just enough to get us out of this." Her stomach churned at the thought. But then one night, lying in bed, her stomach growling with hunger, her body aching from malnutrition, she had a terrifying realization. She was starting to seriously consider it. The next day, she sat across from Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. How would it work?" A sick glimmer of hope lit up Ethan's eyes. "I know someone. He knows people who are willing to pay. You won't have to do much. Just spend some time with them. We'll set a price, and as soon as we have enough, we'll stop." Amelia clenched her jaw. "And you'll be okay with that?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "It's just for survival, Amelia. Just for now." That evening, as Amelia put on her only remaining black dress, her hands trembled. She applied her makeup carefully, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes and the emptiness in her gaze. As she stepped over the threshold of their small apartment, she felt like she was leaving a part of herself behind. She kept telling herself just once, just enough to clear the debts. Amelia's first client was a Wall Street tycoon who gave her more money than Ethan had earned in months of hard labor. The second, a Hollywood producer, doubled that amount. The third took her to a private penthouse in Tribeca and left her with a thick envelope she didn't even dare to count. Ethan was overjoyed. "Darling, you saved us," he exclaimed one evening, a broad smile on his face as he counted the $100 bills she brought home. The debts disappeared overnight. They moved into a new, fully furnished apartment on the Upper East Side. The fridge was always stocked with organic food and champagne. With this steady flow of cash, Amelia proposed a deal to Ethan. "I'll invest in a business for you," she said. "Something stable that can get us on our feet. And then I'll stop all of this." Ethan agreed. With the money Amelia earned, they opened a small contemporary art gallery in Chelsea. Ethan managed it with pride, greeting wealthy clients, shaking hands with big businessmen. He walked with his head held high, driving a Mercedes that Amelia had paid for, wearing designer suits he could only have dreamed of before. But Amelia, she couldn't stop. The gallery was doing well. Yes, but it wasn't enough to sustain the lifestyle Ethan had grown accustomed to. He wanted more, and every time Amelia talked about stopping, Ethan would reassure her. "Just a little longer, Amelia. Just until the gallery is strong enough." So she continued. Until the night everything changed completely. It was supposed to be a simple night. A wealthy tech mogul had asked her to accompany him to a charity event. He was known to be generous, and he did not disappoint. "Amelia, you are a queen," he whispered, handing her a thick wad of cash. The night passed in a whirlwind of laughter, fine wine, and carefree extravagance. She barely noticed the moment exhaustion plunged her into a deep sleep. But when she opened her eyes, it wasn't the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel. It was Woodlawn Cemetery. Amelia's breath hitched. Her body trembled as she stood up among the graves. Her heart pounded in her ears. Nothing was missing. Her Bottega Veneta handbag was there, her phone inside, and the thick envelope of cash she had received was still intact. Everything was exactly the same except for one horrifying fact. She had fallen asleep in a luxury hotel and woken up among the dead. Her breathing became ragged. She heard no sound, no footsteps, no voices, nothing to indicate how she had been brought here. It was as if she had simply vanished from the hotel and reappeared in the cemetery. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to move. The cemetery wasn't far from her home, maybe a 20-minute walk. She often walked past it, always quickening her pace, never imagining she would one day be inside. She stared straight ahead as she walked. The streets were quiet, deserted at this late hour. When she finally reached her building, her body was drenched in a cold sweat. She ran to the door and knocked frantically. "Ethan," she whispered. "Ethan, open up." She knocked harder. "Ethan, it's me. Open the door." Silence. Not a sound from inside. Her heart tightened. Ethan was always home at this hour. If he wasn't in, he should at least be awake and waiting for her. But this silence was too empty, too strange. Then she remembered she had her own key. Her hands trembled as she fumbled in her purse for them. She inserted the key into the lock, turned it. The door creaked open. The living room was exactly as she had left it, except for one thing. Ethan wasn't there. The sofa where he always sat was empty. Amelia exhaled slowly. She had to calm down. Maybe a hot bath would help. She went into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, let the water fill the tub. Just as she was about to undress, the front door creaked again. Ethan walked in looking relaxed, stretching as if he had just returned from a simple night out with friends. "You're back," he said with a small yawn. "I just stepped out with a friend. You should have called." Amelia turned to him, her face rigid. "Ethan," she whispered. "Something happened." Ethan frowned, finally noticing the tension in her body. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then they sat down in the living room. In a trembling voice, she told him everything: how she had fallen asleep at the hotel, how she had woken up in the cemetery with nothing missing but everything feeling strange. Ethan listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, he took her hands. "Amelia, this is not normal," he said in a firm voice. "We must pray, right now." They knelt together in the living room. Ethan led the prayer. His voice was steady but urgent. "Lord, please protect Amelia. Whatever dark forces, whatever demonic powers are trying to manipulate her life, we cast them out in your name." "Amen," they said together. When they finished praying, Amelia felt a little lighter. "Maybe it's over," she said hopefully. Ethan nodded. "It must be." They even went to church the following Sunday for extra prayers. But the next time she met a new client, the nightmare returned. A different hotel, a different face, but everything happened the same way. She fell asleep in luxury money piled in an envelope by the bed, and when she woke up, she was no longer in the hotel room. She was in the cemetery again. Amelia's scream tore through the silence of the night as she sat bolt upright, drenched in a cold sweat. It was the same this time. Nothing was missing. Her purse, the money, her jewelry, it was all there. She ran home trembling, her breath coming in gasps. When she reached the apartment, her hands were shaking so much she could barely get the key in the lock. She knocked, but no one answered. Ethan was gone again. Her brow furrowed in confusion. This wasn't the first time. Every time she returned from the cemetery, he was never there. At first, she hadn't noticed, too horrified to think about it, but now it had become a pattern. Where was he going? Why was he never there when she returned from this nightmare? A sense of unease rose within her, but she tried to ignore it. Something was taking her to the cemetery every time she went on these evenings. Every night she swore it would be the last. But Ethan had a talent for dispelling her doubts. "Just get used to it," he told her one evening, lounging on their sofa, a glass of expensive wine bought with her money in his hand. "You said it yourself, Amelia. Nothing is ever missing. It's just weird. But weird doesn't mean deadly." She shuddered at his words. He had changed. Or maybe she was finally seeing him for who he truly was. She had expected him to be worried, to look for a solution, but he had accepted the situation with a terrifying ease. "What do you want me to do?" Ethan had asked in a barely audible voice. "Get help. See a pastor, a specialist," Ethan had scoffed. "And tell them that you're a high-class call girl who miraculously wakes up in a cemetery every night." "Amelia, be serious. Even if they could help you, what would you do then? Would you quit this job? Do you think we can live on my gallery alone?" The truth was bitter but undeniable. The art gallery was running, but not enough to fund the lifestyle Ethan craved. So Amelia continued. Ethan no longer waited up for her. He didn't even ask if she was okay. The first few weeks he had feigned concern. But now when she returned, he barely looked up from his phone. "Rough night?" he would ask in a detached tone. She never answered because deep down, she knew she wasn't living anymore. She was existing. Something had taken hold of her, and every night it reminded her that she no longer belonged to herself. A few days later one night she returned from the cemetery again. Exhausted, her mind blank. But tonight, something was different. Ethan once again wasn't there, and since it all began 6 months ago, she had never found him at home when she returned from her nightmares. She had always turned a blind eye to this detail. But tonight, her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She walked around the apartment looking for something out of the ordinary. And that's when she saw it in the second bedroom of the apartment they hardly ever used. The mirror. A large standing mirror in the corner of the room. It had always been there. But tonight it seemed different. A strange feeling ran down her spine as she approached it. Instinctively, she moved it slightly. Behind it in the shadows was a small black ceramic jar. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Her breathing became ragged. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. Inside the jar, amidst a black dry powder, was a doll, a female figure. The doll was dressed in a small piece of red cloth, with strings of beads around its waist and tiny pins stuck into its hands and feet. Amelia gasped and nearly dropped the jar. Just then the front door creaked. Ethan walked in relaxed as if everything were normal. "You're back early," he said, placing his keys on the table. Amelia turned to him, her hand gripping the jar. Her voice trembled with suppressed rage. "Ethan, what is this?" Ethan's eyes fell on the jar. His body tensed immediately. "Amelia," he began, taking a step forward, but she recoiled sharply. "No, stay right there." Her voice was sharp as a knife filled with fear and fury. She held up the jar, showing him the doll. "What is this doing in our house? Why was it hidden?" Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked cornered. There was no escape. After a long silence, he sat down on the edge of the sofa, his temples between his hands. "Amelia," he exhaled a long breath. "I didn't want you to stop." Amelia's stomach clenched. "What?" Ethan looked up at her, his face strangely calm. "I went to see someone. A woman. She promised power, wealth, control over your life. She gave me this. She said it would ensure the richest clients would come to you. She said that as long as the doll was in the jar, you would never run out of money. And even if you wanted to, you couldn't stop." Amelia's breath was cut short. Her vision blurred. Her knees grew weak. She looked back at the doll, the pins, the cloth, the beads. And then the truth hit her like a tidal wave. The cemetery, the repetition, the curse. She always woke up there helpless, trapped, unable to escape this life even when she desperately wanted to. It was all connected. This thing had been controlling her. And the person she trusted most, her husband, had been behind it all from the beginning. Amelia stood frozen, her fingers tightening around the cursed jar. The weight of Ethan's confession crashed down on her. It was him. He had sought out magic, performed a ritual, imprisoned her in this existence for money. Her vision blurred with rage. "You did this to me." "You knew." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face as if he were the victim in the story. "Amelia, listen, I did it so we could get out. You said it yourself, the money was too good to stop. I just wanted to make sure it wouldn't." "You wanted to make sure I couldn't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Ethan leaned towards her, pleading. "It's not like that. I didn't want things to get bad. I just wanted us to have enough. Look at us, we're living well, we have everything we need. If you could just accept it." But Amelia couldn't take it anymore. She broke. She snatched the doll out her hands, shaking. "You tied me to this thing, to a cemetery." Ethan took a step forward. "Amelia, please." But he no longer had control over her. In a final burst of rage, she tore the doll apart. The moment it was ripped, an invisible force swept through the room, cold, heavy, suffocating. And in that suspended moment, Amelia knew that something had been broken. But she didn't yet know if it was the curse or something much worse. Then she lifted the jar and threw it hard onto the floor. It shattered into 100 pieces. The air became thick, carrying a disturbing presence that sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. But it was Ethan's reaction that shocked her the most. He screamed. Not in anger, not in frustration, but in fear. A primal fear. His face contorted in sheer panic as he ran for the door without a word to Amelia, barefoot, fleeing the house like a madman. Amelia watched him go. Her breath came in gasps. For the first time, she felt free. But a new coldness crept into her heart. The curse might be broken, but at what cost? And now that she was alone, what would she have to face in the dark? Silence enveloped the apartment after Ethan's panicked footsteps faded away. Amelia stood amidst the shards of the ceramic jar and the torn pieces of the cursed doll. The air, once thick and suffocating, now seemed lighter, cleaner. For the first time in months, she could take a deep breath without feeling an invisible weight on her chest. She was free. But freedom came with a terrifying emptiness. This luxurious apartment, the designer clothes in the closet, the sparkling jewelry on the vanity, all were bought with her humiliation and horror. They were tainted. They were the links in the chain that had bound her. Without a moment's hesitation, Amelia sprang into action. She went through the apartment gathering everything. All the cash, the handbags, the expensive shoes, all the gifts Ethan had bought her with her own money. She stuffed it all into large suitcases. She kept nothing except her phone, a few basic personal items, and the simple clothes she was wearing. Her first destination was not an airport or a train station. It was a small church in her old neighborhood, a place she hadn't been to in years. She walked into the pastor's office, an elderly man with kind eyes. "Father, I need help," she said, her voice weak but firm. "I need to be delivered." She confessed everything from the disastrous wedding, the desperation, to Ethan's horrific proposal, and the nightmare in the cemetery. The pastor listened patiently, without a word of judgment. When she finished, tears streaming down her cheeks, he simply took her hand. "My child," he said gently, "you have carried a burden that was not yours to bear. The greed of another placed a curse on you, but your faith and your strength have broken it. Now it is time to heal." They prayed together, and for the first time in a very long time, Amelia felt a sense of true peace, a serenity that washed over her soul. The curse was broken. The nightmare was over. A few days later, while staying in a small motel outside the city, she received a call from an unknown number. It was a social worker from a public hospital in the Bronx. They had found Ethan. He had been discovered wandering in a state of panic near Woodlawn Cemetery, muttering nonsense about a woman who had stolen his time. His condition was bizarre. Although his ID showed he was in his early 30s, his appearance was that of a man who had aged several decades overnight. His hair was white, his skin wrinkled and sagging, his eyes sunken and lifeless. The doctors could not explain this unnaturally rapid aging. The curse he had intended for Amelia when broken had boomeranged and consumed its creator. He had wanted it all and in the end lost everything, including his youth and his future. Amelia heard the news but felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Ethan had chosen his own path. He wanted to imprison his wife in a world of submission and shame. In the end, he had imprisoned himself in a prison of a decaying body and a shattered mind. Amelia never returned to New York. She used the little money she had left from her previous freelance design work to start a new life in a quiet coastal town in Oregon. She rented a small apartment overlooking the sea and opened her own graphic design firm. The work didn't bring her extreme wealth, but it brought her independence and self-respect. She sold all the cursed designer items and donated the entire sum to charities that help abused women. Sometimes late at night, when the sound of the ocean waves lapped outside her window, she would still remember the cold of the marble in the cemetery. But it was no longer a nightmare. It was a reminder of the price of ambition, the danger of losing oneself for another, and most importantly, the strength hidden within a woman who decided she would no longer be a victim. Amelia had found peace not in opulent luxury, but in the simplicity of a life she had built with her own hands. The nightmare was truly over, and a new dawn was beginning.